I will call our regular meeting to order following our special closed session meeting on Tuesday, May 5th, 2015. I will ask for a roll call again in our regular session, please.
Councilmember Moeller.
Here.
Councilmember Dorenbecker.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hall.
Here.
Mayor Dunbar.
Here. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'd like to invite our Vice Mayor, Richard Hall, to lead us in the pledge, it being his birthday today.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And we do have another item that we need to address before we move on to the adoption of tonight's agenda. We did have, as I mentioned before, a closed session, and so I'll ask our town attorney to speak to any reportable action from that closed session.
I'll be happy to do so, Mr. Mayor, members of the town council, members of the public.
Make sure your light is on.
And that I'm speaking into the microphone. All right. Report out of closed session. The town council discussed settlement of legal action filed by Swank Construction Incorporated for breach of contract. The council during closed session approved a settlement agreement by the following vote. It was unanimous, so all members present voted in favor of the agreement. The terms of the settlement agreement are as follows. 1, Swank Construction will dismiss all claims against the town of Yountville. 2, Swank Construction will indemnify the town against all claims related to this matter that might be made by Trahan Mechanical Incorporated, one of Swank's subcontractors. And 3, the town of Yountville will pay to Swank Construction a total amount, inclusive of various types of payments, $1,197,391. For full details, a copy of the agreement is available in Town Hall for review upon request. It is a public document. And that concludes my report.
So that's all the reportable action from our closed session?
That is correct.
Thank you. What I'm now going to do is read a statement from the council and the town on the conclusion of this matter that will also act as a public media release. On Tuesday, the Yountville Town Council reached conclusion of its 6-year legal battle over construction defects and a contract dispute related to the Yountville Community Center project by agreeing to terms of a binding arbitration decision with the project's general contractor, Swank Construction Incorporated. The town received a $1.7 million award in 2014 as a result of the town's construction defect lawsuit against Swank Construction Incorporated, several of its subcontractors, and the project design team. Swank filed a breach of contract claim against the town for withholding retention funds and for additional costs due to scheduling delays during the construction period in 2008 and 2009. Funding from that initial court settlement is being used to repair the Yountville Community Center at this time. Those repairs are expected to be completed by August of 2016. The Town Council has agreed to pay a total of $1,197,391 to Swank Construction and one of its subcontractors, Trahan, which included additional project costs, release of project retention funds, penalties, and legal fees assigned to the town in a binding arbitration process. Swank filed its complaint shortly after the town filed its construction defect claim against them in 2010. The good news is we can finally put an end to this, said Mayor John Dunbar. It's incredibly frustrating, though, that we can win our construction defect lawsuit but have an arbitration ruling that rewards the same people found liable in that case. The town entered into a construction contract we were confident included appropriate language and safeguards that specifically protected us from such challenges, but an arbitrator interpreted the facts differently. All along, the town was acting to protect the interest and investment made on behalf of our residents. The last 6 years are a stark reminder that it's impossible to predict outcomes in legal challenges, Dunbar said. Town Manager Steve Rogers explained that, quote, the total net cost to the town is approximately $984,000 after release of the $213,000 in the escrow retention account set up in our original contract. We look forward to resolution of this ongoing litigation and focusing on the repairs to the community center and the continued operation of the facility in the manner in which our community envisioned its use. And that's the end of our statement on that matter. So you probably all didn't expect to hear that when you walked in the door, did you? Next, we're going to move on to an adoption of tonight's agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're going to move right ahead to our proclamation for this evening, a presentation designating May as Mental Health Awareness Month, and I welcome Jesus, who's representing People Empowering People, to join me at the podium to accept the proclamation. Thank you for being here tonight. This is a proclamation declaring May 2015 Mental Health Month. Whereas 1 in 4 individuals will experience mental health issues in their lifetimes, which can affect parents, sisters, brothers, spouses, co-workers, and others in our lives. And whereas it is essential to eliminate disparities in mental health by promoting well-being for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, language, place of residence, or age, and ensure equity of access, delivery of services, and improvement of outcomes. And whereas the Mental Health Division seeks to reduce barriers to access, improve community outreach and engagement that will ensure culturally and linguistically competent care to diverse communities through culturally competent services and policies. And whereas, while there is still much work to be done to eliminate disparities in service and increase education about mental illness, Napa County service providers are to be commended for their collaborative approach when working with individuals in need. Whereas a holistic approach to services, which includes prevention and early intervention, is an effective way to meet the needs of individuals at risk of developing mental health issues, individuals who are experiencing early onset of the symptoms of mental illness, or individuals with serious mental illness or severe emotional disturbance. Whereas there is a strong body of research documenting that with support and treatment, between 70 and 90% of individuals with mental illness have a significant reduction in symptoms and improved quality of life. And whereas the Mental Health Division and other community providers have sponsored suicide prevention events and training, including mental health first aid and question, persuade, and refer, also known as QPR, and statistics show that awareness, education, and action do save lives and prevent suicides. Whereas every Napa County resident can be an ally by learning about and dispelling the myths related to mental illness and eliminating stigma by treating individuals with mental illness with respect. Now, therefore, be it resolved, I, John F. Dunbar, as mayor of the town of Yountville, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2015 as Mental Health Month in Yountville. As mayor of Yountville, I also call upon the citizens, government agencies, public and private institutions, businesses, and schools in Yountville to recommit ourselves and our community to increasing awareness and understanding of mental health, to supporting our community members so that they can take action to protect their mental health, and to promoting appropriate and accessible services for all people with mental health conditions.
And I want to
Thank
thank Wellness and Recovery and the town of Yountville, and we thank you, and so does Pat. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose, for being here and representing the organization.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So now would be, yes, you're free to
Thank you.
do something more interesting with your evening. Good night. Now would be a chance to speak on anything not on tonight's agenda.
Okay.
Please.
Mayor, council, thank you for this time. I'm Barb Larson. I'm a resident of Yountville, and I'm here on behalf of the Yountville Pickleheads, and there's a couple here today. just to really give a big shout out of a thanks of Samantha and Jennifer and the entire staff at the community center to say yes to the largest growing sport, pickleball. In this short period of time, we have 20 to 18 people playing. They gave us 3 days. We now have an added night. They gave us free clinics, a clinic of lessons on Friday, which was a huge success. It brought in 2 new people. It brought myself into the community center that I have never arrived in to see all the other great programs you guys have. It's fantastic. So mine is just thank you for being so open-minded, supporting us, and what we would like to look for at the future, because I play in Santa Rosa, Petaluma, Sedoma. They have outside courts. There is 4 courts that are full and 21 people to play. Sometime in the future, our goal, we'd like to look at the Vineyard Park. There's 2 tennis courts there. I would like to have 1, look at it, give us 4 pickleball courts out of 1 tennis court. I really do believe that with the popularity of pickleball, that if we build, they shall come. So that's all I really want to say, and I thank you for this opportunity, really. Where else could you get that?
Great.
So thanks.
Thank you very much for presenting the cause, and thank you all for being here to support. I know it is amazing how rapidly this is catching on throughout the country, I think. So thank you for that. Anyone else like to speak on an item tonight? So that's the one burning issue in the public. Oh, actually, Carla, yeah.
I think it's listed on the agenda.
So what is it you're looking to speak about?
I just wanted to address C, 12C.
Okay, then we'll have public comment
I'll
during
wait
that.
till then?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all, pickleballers. Be safe and sane with your pickleball, please. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on from public comment, seeing no other public moving forward to our consent calendar. We have several items on there, 6 items, I believe. Is there a motion on our consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That unanimously passes. We will move on now to our presentation. We have a presentation at Capital Improvement Project Update. Joe, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, it's my pleasure tonight to talk about the capital improvement program for the current ongoing fiscal year. For the current fiscal year, 2015-16. Currently, we have 43 projects and programs as a part of the CIP for this year. 7 have been completed for this year. 26 are either in design or beginning construction. A little bit of the funding summary for the programs and projects. Total cost is $6.6 million. Funding sources include the general fund, gas tax, Measure A, impact fees, and in the case of our South Washington sidewalk, TDA 3 funds, federal and state grants, and of course our enterprise funds. Significant projects that have been completed or started, town hall structural strengthening project. I think we are all pretty happy that we finished that right before the earthquake, and because of that we came through in pretty good shape. So that was good timing and well done. Community center repairs are ongoing. I think the most notable part of that at this point is that the sandbags and the tarps have been removed from the roof and never to return is our expectation. So we're pretty excited about that. The Hopper Creek flood projects are into bid phase at this moment. We are anticipating a pretty robust bidding group, and we're trying to wrap up the permits, the easements, and the permits from the regulatory agencies as well. It looks like we're going to be in good shape with construction expected to start July 6th. That will be complete by terms of the permit no later than the end of October. So we expect to get out of the ground October 15th and be complete by the end of October. We also completed Madison and Yount Street reconstruct this year, so we have a before and after picture for you. We added some bike lane, Class 2 bike lane, which is a nice addition to that project. We also did some underground work with some of the sewer and water mains, so it was quite a significant project. That road should be good for at least 20 years if we continue to maintain it in the way that we become accustomed to. So it's going to be a really nice addition to the town infrastructure. If we start looking at parks, that's where a lot of our work initially has started and continues to be a focus. The Yountville Community Park Swale was one of the first projects that was started when I arrived here. It is now complete. I think that it was a great way to start that park project for that community park. It also included some playground resurfacing. So a part of that playground resurfacing included moving some of the play structure to meet the most current standards and removal of the bark and installation of a rubberized, more resilient play surface, much easier to maintain, much safer for the people who use it. I think one of the most notable parts of that project for me was when we opened the park initially, we went out to look at the park surface, and there was a disabled customer out using the park, and she had remarked that she had never been able to get out onto the park surface to play with her grandkids. So it was a pretty eye-opening moment for me, and just an example of what kind of good things you can do with that kind of the kind of resources we have here and the council's approval. The next item that we're working on is the Oak Circle parking project. So initially, we thought we would get 5 to 7 spaces. We are now working with our landscape architect. He thinks we're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 spaces. And it's going to be a nice addition to that area in Oak Circle. It's also going to be kind of the initial kickoff for that park, which will include a bridge at some point in the next couple of years as a part of our CIP over into the ad hoc property, where we will continue with our pass system, which will connect up to the mobile home, the path that's in front of the mobile home parks there, right behind Yountville Inn Hotel. So we'll complete our park pass system. That looks to be complete. 3 years is our project completion date. So this is the beginning of that project, the Oak Circle parking, and I think it's going to be a nice addition for parking for the people who live, work, and use that commercial area downtown and need some additional parking. So we're looking forward to that. The last thing I wanted to talk about was a dashboard that our management analyst Nathan Steele has created that helps us track our projects in ways that we were never able to do before. It helps us keep track of the project, the agreement numbers, things like contractor, the initial contract price, how much we have encumbered and how much we still have available for funding, some of the other documents that could be attached like the resolution, and then a progress log. So having the in-house staff here to be able to help us even increase our efficiency and effectiveness more. This is just a perfect example of that dashboard. We have those for each project, and we'll just be Nathan will be fine-tuning that as we go. It's a phenomenal tool, and it makes our job so much simpler to just kind of look at something in a glance, especially managers who don't really necessarily look at it on a day-to-day or maybe have only a cursory glance at it. You can look at it in a few minutes and understand exactly what's going on with that project and have a real grasp of where it's at. So I think that prior to Nathan's arrival, it was something that we just didn't have, and now with his addition to the staff, it's just part of one of the things that we're able to do, including these many small projects that we have now with the town manager signing authority and our purchasing program of under $45,000. A lot of our projects don't fall into that range that goes above that. So we're able to do a lot of these smaller projects with that signing authority and able to track it in-house and do a lot of that work in-house that in years past we may have had other teams helping us accomplish. Now we're doing the majority of that in-house. I think the two best examples of that this week are the Vintage Inn sidewalk project, where we've partnered with the Vintage Inn. They needed to remove and replace our sidewalk. We needed to remove and replace our curb and gutter. So we partnered with them. They're managing and performing the work under their contract, and we're helping them with some of the other assistance that that we would ordinarily have provided to do that sidewalk work. South Washington Street, from Champaign down to the church, is another example of sidewalk that we got a TDA 3 grant for. And now we did the design work mostly in-house, did a little bit of the engineering outside, which the majority would have been done in years past, brought it back inside, and now that is going to construction. And because we saved a significant amount, we're actually able to add a few streetlights that weren't included in the project, but because we have a little bit more capacity, we were able to add a couple of streetlights down there, which we think is going to increase the safety and the attractiveness of that piece of the downtown south of South Washington. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Questions? Councilmember Moeller?
Yeah, I have several kind of specific questions. One is on, and the page numbers keep changing, so I'm going to use the electronic page numbers that I
Okay.
see. The first one is on page 29. It's project ST005. It's the traffic and circulation plan. So it says in here, I have got a couple questions that I thought when we just did our circulation element, we already did the level of service, and we didn't really do a parking analysis. We used a different parking analysis. So isn't this already done?
It is done. That's one of the ones that that's one of the projects that
because the status said active.
It should be close.
It's close.
Okay, all right, well, that's an easy fix. Then the other ones are starting on page 43, and they have to do with the sewer line replacement, WW3015, and then the water line replacements, WA2015, WA3015. So we'll just start with the sewer main replacement. So that's about $350,344 altogether. So that money will be coming out of the enterprise fund for sewer.
Actually, I believe that money was used for the Madison and Yount Street project. The majority of that money was used for Madison and Yount Street for that.
So this is kind of done too.
That is done. That's why most,
Okay,
a lot.
so that was already in the rate structure. Okay, so that doesn't.
And that, if you may recall, that was a combined bond financing, and
Right.
the wastewater rates will
I
be
just didn't
paying
know that
back
was,
that
because it didn't really specify that
$350,000.
in the text. Okay. Then the other one, I think these are new, the WA 2015 and WA 3015. Those we have not done, correct?
We are working on WA 2015 as an ongoing program to replace our water meters. So in the past couple of months, we've replaced the meters in the commercial district. Last week and this week.
Well, so my real question, though, and I don't
Okay.
need
I'm
the
sorry.
detail, because it's total, we got 1.2 million, and when we did our rate structures that almost 5 years ago, we're coming up in another less than a year, these were not in there. So these funds are,
Our WA 2015 is a water meter and transmitter replacement program, is that correct?
right,
Yeah, that's not 1.2 million.
no. The
Right.
WA 2015 is 200,000, the WA 3015 is 1 million, so you get a total of 1.2.
Well, 950.
3015 again was part of the Madison Yount project, I believe, and that's why that bill was,
Because what I'm trying to get at, do we need to, are these already in the rates, or is this new?
No, the current programs, and I'll let Kathleen expand, but all of the current funding is within the rate structure. And when we begin our new program, we will also adjust and evaluate future projects for the next cycle.
Right.
But the
So all these, the 2015 is in there, right?
correct.
Okay. And then the 3015 is too. All right.
Is in there.
good.
I will say that
Good.
we were
Good.
very conscious of the fact that the rates have been increased over the past few years, and that the enterprise fund is just kind of starting to be a bit stable. So we approached it with a status quo mindset. So
Okay.
we are kind of continuing in that mindset.
That's,
And I would just add, the water fund has not had a lot of capital outlay, so
right, it's mostly it's all the sewers. That was
Yes,
really heavy.
yes.
And we're still a little behind, but I think we'll probably
yes,
catch
we're
up
starting
just in
to
time
see light
that
at
we're
the end of the
predicting.
tunnel.
Okay, good. I'm just
And
glad
just
it's all in there.
In full understanding, if you may recall, when we adopted our new rate schedule 5 years ago, we established a system replacement fee component, and we're building that bank so that we have funding reserved to do future projects. So that's exactly the intention. And going forward, we're hopeful that, I'll spill the beans. The current budget proposal, as you know, does not have a rate increase recommendation for either water and wastewater. So those rates will be flat. And then during the course of this year, we will begin an evaluation and then an analysis of the future 5 years. So we are fairly confident at a staff level that we will not need the significant type of a rate increase structure that we've gone through the last 5 years. It'll focus on the maintaining the system at an adequate level, but we will not have to climb out of an operating deficit, and then we will be much more cost effective with the system replacement component.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, Councilmember Mueller?
Nope, that's it.
Councilmember Dornbecker?
I have no questions. Good report.
Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor?
Only comment as well, I appreciate all the detail that went into it, and I would love to see the dashboard. We could see it on the screen, but I don't recall it being in the report. It'd be nice to see kind of what a basic dashboard looks like, just for purposes of, we don't see all the details like you're saying, management. It'd be nice to see kind of what you guys are looking at, but no, I mean, the outcome of what we've accomplished and what has been accomplished and is ongoing is significant, and you should be proud of yourself and the team, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, we have a great team.
And I agree with that. My question relates also to the dashboard. Are those individual dashboard reports available online on our website? Or is there?
They are not. That's an internal document.
Okay. So the CIP is available, but those are internal progress reports and funding structures and all that.
Right.
And we also have them referenced in a different format in our budget, which will be available. So there's a way for the public that's interested to monitor these projects as they go forward through the budget.
Right.
And through.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
It's transparent.
Right.
Everything's transparent.
Great. Thank you. Any member of the public like to comment on the update? Any other questions from council? Thank you very much for the report, and Nathan, also collectively from all of us, thank you for adding that that feature. That you're right. I think, Joe, that to have additional capabilities on our team is going to be effective as well as fiscally helpful.
Yeah, it definitely has helped us become more efficient and effective. I mean, I'm able to look at a moment's notice and see where we're at in that job, in the budget, and it just is a tremendous tool for us to be able to kind of do that without having an awful lot of reports being generated. It's one paper, and he's linked it all together, and it works fantastic. We're going to continue to fine-tune that, but it started out really good, so it's only going to get better.
Great. Well, thanks again for that. So that is our improvement project update. We're going to move on. We have no public hearings listed for tonight. We're going to move to our first administrative item, regular item 12A, discussion and possible direction regarding proposal from Upper Valley Disposal and Clover Flat Landfill for rate increase and franchise term extension. And I will call for our staff report on that item, please.
Thank you. Meeting, Councilmember Moeller, who is the town's representative to the Upper Valley Waste Management Authority, JPA, briefed you all on the results of a recent board meeting and indicated, and the council concurred with, in staff taking a look at some of the, I'm going to say, the waste hauler and the landfill operators' proposals. I put together a fairly detailed staff report. One of the concerns was that she was concerned that if the town was going to be potentially, if the impact had a significant rate increase or franchise extension, she wanted some analysis on the part of the organization on what its impacts were. I've provided some of that in the staff report. What I will say is Steve Lederer is here with the staff for the JPA, And I think the general theme that I will say is that based on the consultant report, which was the only information I had available, you can see there that I had a lot of concerns from a staff review standpoint. In conversations with Mr. Lederer, I think there's some encouraging news, which is he's explained to me that at this stage, and I'll let him go into more detail, but it's my understanding that a franchise extension, which got the most significant red flag caution, is not under consideration at this point, so it's probably appropriate to let Steve come up and share with us. But I do want to share that this is one of the positive things, and every once in a while, it's important that we realize as individual council members, we may serve on a JPA board or something, and you all have a very good track record of sharing and reporting information so that there was a concern at the whole council. And I think this opportunity to look at this provided some support that there were some concerns. I mean, I think there's a lot of laudable projects in the consultant report, but our concern was a real transparent public process and that it seems to be going very quickly. So I'm very excited that there is at least some acknowledgement that this isn't necessarily going to be moving forward in the way it looked like it was. And with that,
So do you want Steve to speak as part of the staff report or part of
Steve
public
is here
comment?
to share with us a little bit more about where they're at.
But as part of the staff report or part public comment?
Part of the staff report.
Okay. Then Steve,
this is
it's time. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight.
Hi, Steve Lederer, County Public Works Director, also the Upper Valley Waste Management Agency Manager, and that's the role that I'm here in today. Steve, it's good to hear you're excited about garbage. Very few people get excited about that. Yes. So just a little update on what's going on at UVA and UVDS. Is it worthwhile for me to kind of step back and talk about the agency and kind of how we got here, or do you all feel comfortable?
Depends on how far back you're going. A brief summary would be helpful, I think.
Okay, I'm going to do all the. I'm going to go back to 1993 and get here in a minute.
A brief summary would be very helpful.
In a minute. So the Upper Valley Waste Management Agency, or UVA, is a joint powers authority, Yountville, St. Helena, Calistoga, and the unincorporated county, essentially from Yountville north. And it was formed in 1993 primarily as an outgrowth of the solid waste regulations that were coming about at the time. Your waste was going into the Clover Flat landfill. And at the time, with the Superfund law and whatnot, there were a lot of towns who had been sending waste to landfills, and then those landfills would leak and the operator would be long gone and the towns would be on the hook. So the purpose of the JPA was twofold. One was to set consistent rates throughout the Upper Valley because they were all different at that point. And the other, frankly, was to make sure that the landfill wasn't going to become a problem in the long term. Same thing happened in the South County. The Napa Vallejo Waste Management Agency also formed around the American Canyon landfill and similar issues. So the JPA was established, and franchise agreements were established with Upper Valley Disposal Service, UVDS, which is the waste hauler, and a separate franchise agreement with Clover Flat Landfill, which is the landfill. The Pistone family owns both companies, so we tend to think of them sometimes as together, but they're truly two separate contracts. So both of those contracts expire in 2025. And as part of the board meeting in April, UVA board meeting in April, the company made a presentation, as they're allowed to do, they're on the agenda, and they proposed a number of projects going forward that have a lot of potentially positive impacts. Some of them are discretionary. Gee, these feel like really good ideas. Others are actually mandatory as a result of changes in laws and whatnot. And the basic proposition that the company was proposing was they can do many more things and they can hold rates down if they can do it over a longer period of time. So, for instance, some of the projects they suggested were, on the mandatory side, they need to replace several of their trucks, and they're entitled to rate recovery for replacing trucks, and they could just go out and buy more diesel trucks, which is what they've been doing. but they proposed maybe we'd be interested in funding a compressed natural gas station and going to CNG trucks. More expensive up front, but theoretically should pay for themselves over time. One of the other mandatory things that came up is the rules about how much money you need to put away for landfill closure have changed, and the $6 million that they've been targeting to is now $9 million. So again, they're under that change in law, they're required to, or they are capable of recovering that through the rates. If they recover it in 10 years, it's X. If they recover it over a 20-year period or a 30-year period, then that becomes smaller. So essentially what they were proposing was here are a number of goodies, if you will, some of which are mandatory, again, some of which are discretionary. One of the other ones I should mention, one was installation of a solar array at the Whitehall facility, and the other was installation of a biogas plant, a wood chip biogas plant up at Clover Flat. And those are two things they said, look, we'll fund this 100%, but again, we can't do it in 10 years. We have to do it in 20. So the board had a discussion about sort of balancing those factors, cheaper rates versus contract extension, extend a contract versus bidding a contract, pluses and minuses on both of those. Which of these projects might be interesting? Mandatory ones are mandatory, but which are of the discretionary ones they might be interested in. What the board asked, we're in our rate season with UVA right now. UVA analyzes and adjusts rates on an annual basis. May 1st, which was a couple of days ago, the company submits their rate package based on past costs and upcoming costs, and whatever proposals they have in terms of special projects and whatnot. And then we go to the UVA board late in June, and the UVA board decides whether they like that number, whether they like the projects that have been proposed, and a rate happens from there. As it happens in the last, I want to say 3 years, there actually has not been any rate increases. So it's been very, very flat. And frankly, the company's strategy is to try and keep those rates flat in return for time. So whether that's going to happen or not is, of course, up to the UVA board. We discussed that the concept of doing a rate extension between now and June, a contract extension between now and June was just not going to happen. There was no way to do the analysis that was needed. But the board was interested in seeing what the company's proposals meant in terms of rates. So the board asked UVA to submit on May 1st 2 rate packages, one that showed rates, if you will, under just our standard formula, and one that showed rates assuming a contract extension. On May 18th, which is our next UVA board meeting, I'll be able to tell the board what those numbers are. I don't honestly know yet. They did make their submittal, but it's 46 megabytes and hundreds of pages like it always is, and I haven't even started sort of going through that. So on May 18th, we can give the board a little bit of a preview of what that means, and then on June 23rd, the board will be asked to adopt a rate package based on what the company has submitted and our analysis and the various options. What will happen next year, if the UVA board is interested, is then we would open the franchise agreement to analysis and negotiation, and again, if the board is interested in an extension, that's something that would happen next year or the year after or whenever the board was interested in doing it, and assuming that we could come to some sort of agreement with the company to do so. So that's kind of where we are right now. There are a number of very interesting ideas on the table. They don't come with a lot of detail. For instance, they suggested the CNG fueling facility and $1 million cost. I don't currently have any numbers. Is $1 million a good number or a bad number? I don't know. But we will know before we ask the board to take action. So that's kind of where we are, I think, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I'll invite our representative, Councilmember Moeller, craft any questions initially that you might have, or of our town manager, because she brought the concern with to us, and initially there was great concern on our part that the process seemed to be moving along incredibly quickly, and that there was a significant document presented to the board without time to really evaluate it, and that's a different message than what I'm hearing from you tonight. So, if Councilmember Moeller, if you can share your board perspective as well as any questions you might have for Steve.
Yeah, my board perspective actually is quite different, because I was, trying to sort through a 53-page, very complex document just at the meeting, and I really did not have any sense what's mandatory and, what, if something is mandatory, I think it's always good. Our staff certainly would provide us with at least a summary of those, whatever bills or legislation that accompanies that. And I think that would be very valuable for us. And to really, I don't know if everyone got to look at this 53-page document, but it certainly does not lay out in a way that I can certainly figure out. So that's why it was great that staff could take a look at it. What was mandatory? What's discretionary? What has to happen when there's a lot of moving pieces that kind of jump around? So I really think that it really needs to get broken down in a way that is certainly understandable. We really know what's mandatory. Before we start opening up our ratepayers' checkbooks and writing checks, we really have to thoroughly know what these projects are, what order they're going to come in, and have, I think, an outside person. I think everybody heard that the company provided this report. So I think it really behooves us as an agency to have an independent analysis, because there's lots of different ways to get some of these things done. And there's a lot of other options that certainly aren't being put together. We all know, because we get our trash picked up on Monday, there's some new trucks, and this might be laudable, but we have 3 trucks that come down our streets to pick up 3 separate cans. I mean, that certainly increases cost and traffic and impacts on our streets and air emissions and fuel costs and things like that. So I think it would really help to really have some good analysis instead of spending possibly millions on stuff that I really can't articulate or help explain if we're raising the rates what they're for. So that's kind of what I'm looking for is, some support to deliver what message we want to deliver back to the agency, at least from Yountville's perspective.
Thank you. One question I'll ask Steve is, what's driving the timing of this review? I'm not sure if I heard you say, because it does sound, Councilmember Moeller presents the perspective that, and you said yourself you haven't even been able to look at the giant, number of pages that you have to review. What's driving the May, June timeline, and is it really critical that that timeline be followed?
Well, yes, our franchise agreement every year requires a submittal by May 1st that's analyzed, and then rates are adjusted last week in June. So that's by contract document, so we need to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to make any final decisions or even interim decisions on the proposed projects. If the board is not interested or not yet ready to fund those, then they simply won't be part of the rate package. They would roll over to either a mid-year or simply to next year. So at one level, it's relatively straightforward. It's the same rate review that we've done, since, not quite since 1993, because the methodology has changed a little bit. But it's what makes it a little more complicated is that the company is taking a longer-term view and saying, well, here are some things that we'd really like to do. Now, some of them, like the biogas plant or the solar, those aren't time-dependent. It doesn't really matter whether they happen this year or next year or whatever. A couple of the things are more, they're more mandatory and they're more being driven by time. As an example, and I'm going to pull numbers a little bit, but let's take the change in law related to the landfill closure. So they've been putting away a certain amount of money, thinking their target was $6 million. Their target is now $9 million because the law changed. Again, they're entitled to recover that. So if this year we simply do a rate adjustment based on the 10 years that are left, let's say that number is going to, the landfill tipping fee, say, and I'm just pulling a number, say would go up $10 a ton. I think we're at $64. So the 64 would be 74. Whereas if we were to stretch that out, maybe that $10 is now $4. So some of the things are coming to a head sooner, and some things really are not time dependent at all. And we just, it depends on the quality of data we have and what we can analyze that. And certainly, again, the board is not being asked to do a contract extension as part of the June meeting because, again, there's just no way we would be ready to do that. So the board will need to look at, do they not want to address that at all? Is there some sort of interim step where we can figure out how to address some of the mandatory needs, but leave the contract extension for another day? Does the board simply want to say, we're not interested in a contract extension, we'll live till 2025 and we'll bid it? So the board will have a number of options based on, kind of what the numbers say.
And so the presentation, if I understand it correctly, in the 50-plus page document Councilmember Mueller referenced, there were projects, and I think you described some of them, that are being proposed to happen that will be funded by the rate adjustment that you're talking about that's either short-term or longer-term. But some of those, like the two that you called out that are not time-sensitive, are, I would believe, significant cost projects. And so if those are removed from the consideration, how does that change the rate increase structure? Are those being subtracted out and then the rate adjustment is being adjusted down because you don't need that money yet?
Well, those two projects specifically, the biogas and the solar, those are not in the rate package at all. What the company is essentially saying is, at some point, if we get an extension, we'll do it on our own nickel. Ratepayers will never see it. And if we don't get an extension, then we can't do those projects. So for those specifically, what the company is basically saying is, does the board value these projects for their environmental benefits and the things they bring with them versus the possibility of doing an extension?
But there's no offer to do those projects without the rate adjustments.
That is, there's no offer to do it without an extension of the contract. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To allow for a longer-term rate adjustment.
Right. Their position, and again, I haven't analyzed their numbers, but their position is they couldn't afford to do that kind of project without a much longer time horizon.
So they would want assurances over a longer period of time.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. Other questions, Vice Mayor?
I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. This is a lot of complex information, and I don't even pretend to say that I understand it, but I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to ask the question. So I guess one thing, and I'm hearing that there's, obviously this annual process that the JPA goes through, and they make a recommendation as to whether their rates are going to change or whatever based on current operating structure and mandates, required fields. But then, as I think I'm hearing, there's these secondary things that are maybe nice to haves, or are we interested in having them, and that becomes almost a negotiation. Is there a possibility that one of the, and I don't know, I'm asking, so maybe I'll show my naivete. Would there be an opportunity where one of the jurisdictions or municipalities decided not to participate? So if the JPA made the decision they wanted to go and put in the solar array, and Yountville said, well, we don't want to extend or take the rate increase, how does that work, or does it work? Is it a requirement that we're all in or we're not, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And essentially, the latter. We're all in or we're not. As a JPA, we're all under the same agreement. So, and to be honest with you, I haven't looked at the agreement for a long time in terms of if one of the members wanted to leave the agreement. I honestly don't, I just haven't looked at that. But as long as everyone's in, essentially we're all in it together.
Okay, so then I think you answered my question. if Calistoga, and I'll be hypothetical, decided they were going to do that extension, but then Yountville, I'll use that as a hypothetical, decided not, then it's a deal killer for whatever aspect of that project was being presented at the time. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair analysis. When the JPA was set up, it was set up for all to act together.
Okay. Thank you.
But I want to make sure I understand what your question was. Can a single member halt the action of the entire board? Is that what you were asking?
If there's a contract, I guess my question is, if we have a contract today through the JPA to extend through 2025, and I guess it would require whatever the board of the JPA is to say, well, we're not going to agree to do something, and even though one of the other powers decided they wanted to, in theory, it would potentially kill any project presentation that's going on. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to presuppose, and I know there's a lawyer sitting there as well, but I think, and this is taking it to its extreme, if, for instance, taking the extension as an example, if 4 members of the board or 3 members of the board decided they wanted to extend the contract, and Yountville, as an example, decided they did not want to, I believe what would happen is that, well, certainly that act would pass. I mean, the majority of the board would choose to do so. I think then Yountville would have the opportunity to decide at some point, based on whatever it says in the JPA, whether they wanted to leave the JPA at some point.
That's the thrust of my question.
And that might be in 2025. I mean, I'm not sure where the outs are, because again, I haven't looked at it.
I'm just saying
But as long as you're in, you're in. And clearly, as with any agency, there's a way to get out. I just don't know exactly what it is for this one.
But just to clarify a little more, for example, the Veterans Home, which is in our property area boundaries, they're not part of the JPA. And if Yountville decided to leave the JPA, there would be nothing restricting us from contracting, just like the Veterans Home does, directly with the company.
Understood. And that was the thrust of my question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
I had a question about the mandate, about the closure fund for the landfills. Can you tell me what does that mean exactly? I mean, would Clover Flats be then closed and they'd have to find another area to work as the landfill?
Well, the closure fund, Clover Flat is permitted to accept waste till 2047, which is an estimate based on how much airspace they have and how much waste is going into the hole. As it happens, there's less waste going in on an annual basis than they're permitted. So the reality is 2047 is really probably 2067 or whatever. But what this closure fund does is when the landfill is closed, when it does reach its capacity, there's money in the bank to make sure that the landfill is properly closed, which means there's a cap that goes over it. It means that there is money for decades of groundwater monitoring to make sure that anything that's happening under the ground is doing its thing. There's money to make sure that there'll still be landfill gas. There's money to manage that. So that fund is there, again, to make sure that the operator doesn't make his profit and disappear. So that takes care of that landfill. Let's say the landfill, for some reason, let's say the landfill closed 5 years from now. We would then be in a position as the JPA, we would go out for, and let's say a new landfill was not being created in Napa, which is pretty likely. I think it would be very difficult to do that. So we would then go out for bid, essentially, to other landfills and say, what sort of rates can we get for you to take our garbage? And then instead of our garbage going to Clover Flat, it would probably actually go to a transfer station, place where it would all be collected, and then it would be hauled down to wherever. That's actually what happens in the South County. There's a transfer station on Devlin Road. So essentially all the City of Napa garbage, City of Vallejo, City of American Canyon, there are hauling companies, that's a separate contract, that take their waste to the transfer station. That's a separate agency. And then that agency does a contract, in this case with Potrero Hills over in Solano, and that's where the garbage goes. So it's very convenient, certainly from a traffic standpoint, to have your own landfill. And that's part of why the two agreements, even though they're separate agreements, are kind of side by side, with the idea being that the county, the members of the JPA, they have this hauling contract, but they also then have this convenience of the nearby landfill so that there's not garbage being trucked, out of town and all that mileage, and frankly, additional cost for trucking and all of that sort of stuff. So I think I answered your question, but I'm not 100% sure.
But just to add to that a little bit, I mean, the shortfall in this in this trust fund, there's still a lot of question in my mind how that really occurred, because if we don't understand it, it could always occur again. And we just provided recently a 15-year extension. So if we'd been calculating how much money needs to go in the trust fund, how can all of a sudden we be that much short when we just added 15 years to the fund to pay it off over? So that information is still just...
Actually, that one's really easy, because the amount of money that has to be transferred is calculated by CalRecycle. It's actually not done locally. CalRecycle has every landfill on a schedule to, they analyze the landfill, the size, the type of liner, the location, and all of that, and they come up with a number. They set the number for the company, and that was the number that the company was shooting for. A couple of years ago, CalRecycle changed the formula, so the number changed.
Yeah, I know. I read all that. The issue is we've just extended it by 15 years. I mean, it's that kind of information that still it just doesn't make sense.
Well,
how that could change.
I don't necessarily want to speak for Steve, but we see this all the time in the state, that we are complying with conditions and then the state changes the conditions and we're no longer compliant. It sounds like that's what we're talking about in this case.
Right, but yeah, I'm just saying that's one part. And that would make sense that, based on just until last year, when we thought it was going to close in 2035, but then all of a sudden we extended it for 15 years. So that's the piece that's not factored in. Because if you owed this amount, even though if it was wrong, you owed a little bit more, now we've got 15 more years. So there's still just a lot of stuff that I can't explain to anybody that I would like to be able to explain.
Just to get the years, the last extension of the contract was in 2008. At that point, the contract was to expire in 2015, and it was extended an additional 10 years to 2025. So that's how we got to where we are.
Any additional questions?
I don't even know how to ask them. I did have one more, and that is, are you, the landfill is located in unincorporated Napa County?
Correct.
And so are you subject to their climate action plan? And is that why you're looking at these alternatives for the trucks and the et cetera?
I'll parse that a couple of different ways. The U is actually not me. The landfill is owned privately by Clover Flat Corporation, so they are a franchisee. So that's the U. It's them. The county doesn't currently have a climate action plan. They got close a couple of years ago, and just it never got over the finish line. So they're not subject to the plan that doesn't exist currently. I will say that the company has historically in the garbage business, the government, the agency is dragging the company, into 3 decades behind. This has been a very different relationship. It has oftentimes been the company coming forward with environmental projects. The composting that's done at Whitehall was something started by Mr. Pistone in the early 90s when nobody was doing that. So in many ways, the company is environmentally ahead of at least the requirements. I'll say certainly Yountville. I know my county board is very interested in environmental projects and whatnot, but the company is really in some ways out ahead of what is actually being demanded of them from a sustainability standpoint.
Thank you.
And I would say that when Councilmember Mueller presented this to us at our last meeting, one of our concerns was how she explained the process was working or not working, that it appeared that it was being brought forward in a significant amount of data to be absorbed and to be acted on almost immediately. And so you're representing that there are at least 2 meetings coming forward that the board will be taking consideration and possible action. And some of this may not even be acted upon in those meetings. It may be tabled for future discussion.
Yeah, it's really whatever the board wants to do, and the actual contract extension will not be on either of these agendas. It's just not ready.
Okay, great. Well, any other questions right now, Steve or
I just
or
have one
Steve?
question, yeah. Steve, in your experience with something like this, especially with so many moving factors and the franchise extension, do you think this is something that warrants an external consultant to come in and help provide direction to staff and the board?
The reality is, and again, it will be up to the board if they want to invest that money and whatnot, but I would guess yes. Part of it is the level of complexity, part of it is my lack of time, because I'm a little busy.
Well, I'm just saying, and I'm asking, the reason I'm coming is, you note in here, I find the process that Mr. Lederer and his team are subject to cumbersome and almost challenging, and I think it leads to either potentially too much acceptance and reliance, and I will also point out that we have a very good garbage company. This is not about the garbage company. Unfortunately, this is really about a process discussion. But I do think in today's environment, especially when you look at, when somebody plops a 10-year and a 20-year franchise extension, I'd like to have that external analysis that says, well, here's what the current rates have paid for, here's the delta on something. Yes, this appears to warrant it. Then the board has, I think, a little more of a informed information set to help them. And I also know from a staff perspective, and I'm very happy that we don't do our own internal franchise negotiations, having done a number of these in my career, it's not a lot of fun. Getting the data, processing it, and analyzing it's very challenging. So I would just say, I think I would certainly like to support that, encourage Councilmember Moeller to support from a practical that bringing, a consultant in to help staff, I think, should be an important thing, because if it's warranted, let's understand that, and then maybe we all agree. It's just hard to make that decision, especially when I looked at the Edgar report. It was just so all over the point, I couldn't track where it was coming from.
Welcome to Evan.
So thank you for part 2 of our staff report. I appreciate that. I'll invite any member of the public that's here tonight, if they want to ask questions of the report, to please come forward and do so now. Welcome.
To you too. Thank you. Carrie Dorman. And I just had a couple of questions. The 2 actual providers, Upper Valley and Clover Flat, do they serve others besides RJPA? And if they do, have they made similar extend and reduce offers to other participants or other franchise or contracting parties?
Thank you. I'll invite either member of our staff report to answer the public question.
I can try. Upper Valley provides some services in Lake County. It's a separate company, actually, although again it's owned by the Pistone, and I have no idea what the actual contractual requirements are up in Lake.
But even if you knew them, they would not be relevant because it's a separate company outside the JPA.
Right. Yeah. That's really, I don't know. I believe that's the only other place they do business, but it's a separate company under a separate jurisdiction. I just don't know any of the rules up there.
Nor do I.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other member of the public? Seeing none, let's see, what direction is being requested tonight? Is it just recommendation to our representative to take back some of our concerns?
Correct.
Okay. Do you feel like you've received sufficient guidance by staff and council?
Certainly by staff. Is there any opinions from the council that you could summarize?
Well, I'll offer the one that I brought up earlier, which is I'd like to hear if the board is looking to exclude any particular projects, if there is a consideration of an extension of the agreement in order to reduce the impacts, or at least extend the impacts of a rate restructuring over time, to see what projects are really critical that would be impacting that rate structure increase. Does that make sense?
So the critical ones are the mandatory ones. And we should also evaluate
If there
the
are,
background for really what makes them mandatory.
and also if there are others that are not mandatory, mandated by the state, but we feel as a member of the JPA, they would be advantageous to us. Because if they're legitimate projects and we feel like they would benefit our ratepayers, then we would want to consider those.
No, I totally agree. I just don't understand any of the projects. That's really where I'm kind of coming from because of the report and the lack of analysis. So that's really what I'd like to take back, if everybody agrees, that before there's any agreement, whether they're mandatory or nice to do, that, I mean, we really need to understand what we're doing, what it costs, which one depends on which other one, and as staff recommended, getting an independent person to analyze that. It's just seems like a conflict to have the same person who proposed these reports, they're going to benefit a private company, to be the one to analyze them.
Well, and staff is here hearing that message already and being able to take that back and have it under consideration prior to the next board meeting.
Right, so if that's, if everyone's in
Any
agreement.
other?
No, I think that's all reasonable direction.
Yeah.
And thank you for your representation
Yes, thank
of all of us in the JPA, because as I think the town manager said, we may get to the point where we agree that all this makes sense, but until there's clarity and understanding of the process and what they're really asking for, excuse me, it might be premature for us to be able to
Right.
make that decision.
Right.
So
Thank
thank
you.
you for that. I'm sure not coincidentally, our next agenda item is introduction and potential waiving of the reading of our ordinance as it relates to collection, transportation, and disposal of solid waste.
I'll go ahead and take this one. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I too am very excited about garbage. So excited that I went ahead and made some slight adjustments and tweaks to the relatively recently adopted town ordinance about collection requirements and exemptions from those service requirements. And for the most part, these were just clarifications and cleanups. So there were a number of questions raised by actually the county and other members of the JPA about exactly how it functioned and what it meant. Also, staff gave me some feedback that maybe the language could have been clearer to implement what the town's original intention was. So the amendments are really not so much new things, but clarifications of what I understood the intent was all along. And the nutshell is most folks in town need to be having their garbage collected. You're not allowed to take your household garbage to a public can and just stick it in there, nor can you use your neighbor's can, except under some very limited circumstances and limited types of neighbors. And there are some exemptions for people who self-haul, people who maybe share a driveway, adjacent parcel property owners, things that sort of make sense intuitively but don't expand the exemptions to apply to too many folks. But there is a legitimate opportunity for people to say that they don't need service and have their own arrangements and prove that to the town manager, and with the proper documentation, he issues an exemption. They don't get the service, they don't have to pay. That's the nutshell explanation. If you have any questions about exactly how it works, I'd be happy to answer it.
First question is that in the red line attachment, I see no red line, and so I can't tell what the...
That's an Apple iPad issue, and the
Right.
two versions, and that's a good clarification we'll work on. You'll see one is the clean document, and that reflects the changes. The goal of the whole red line was so you could see what was changed.
So can you just highlight your changes verbally for us? Anything of substance, if there is, I mean, we don't need punctuation grammar changes, but if you're talking about changing, substantive part of this ordinance.
Yeah, if I had it open in front of me, I could be a little clearer about it. But Sure, if you have a few minutes to wait for
Okay.
Julia
I have an
bring it up.
alternate question to fill in the gap.
Okay,
while-
Councilmember
While
Mueller.
that's coming. Can you address Prop 218? Because, and address it in terms of whether it just really kicks in if something is mandatory, or whether it's related to property rights, or does it relate to trash?
Prop 218 certainly relates to trash. It's got solid waste collection is mentioned within the measure itself, so we know at some point it does relate. And the key question really is whether the fee being charged is for a property-related service. And the definition of property-related service is, well, it changes, but basically it's something that is incident to ownership of property. It's something that is really necessary to normal use and enjoyment of property. And sometimes there's a distinction, for example, made between voluntary acts, commercial use of property, what we wouldn't normally consider average property ownership uses, such as use of water. That certainly water rates are a property-related fee, electricity to some extent. So trash service can be subject to Prop 218. The other aspect of it, which you bring up, is the mandatory nature, and that has to do more with the definition of the term impose. So a fee has to be imposed by a local government agency to qualify for Prop 218. The definition of impose, again, is something we argue about, but basically it means you have to pay it. So the analysis would turn on whether there are viable alternatives. So in some instances, for example, it's been argued that electric rates are not imposed because you could theoretically have your house solar equipped and be off the grid. I don't think any courts have accepted that argument before, but that's the kind of idea. In this instance, it's a little easier to argue that if it's not truly imposed, you have alternatives, right? So by being able to self-haul, by being able to share service or be vacant from your property and not actually be using it, you don't necessarily have to pay the fee. So the mandatory versus voluntary nature of accepting garbage service is one part of the analysis. There's quite a lot more to it, though, and without trying to give a full evaluation of whether the garbage fees are subject to Prop 218, the fact that there is a viable and reasonable alternative to mandatory service in your ordinance is significant to the analysis and greatly reduces any possibility that someone would claim 218 applies. It doesn't completely necessarily eliminate risk, as we like to say, but it's a significant part of the analysis for sure. But it did seem, just to elaborate a little bit, it did seem that the original ordinance also allowed for exemptions from service.
Right.
This amendment really was an attempt to clarify that there are real viable exemptions and exactly what they look like.
And I have some more.
Thank you very much. And so that was the real point of the amendment, was to make them crystal clear and also to clarify the procedure for qualifying for an exemption, which I think is very important in terms of functionality for staff. How exactly do we do this? And for the public. And the basic idea here, let me see, if I can just go down the changes. The recitals are not terribly different. Let's see, Section 13.80.010. What this change basically did was explain that a person that the default rule is that you have to have garbage service if you have water service, subject to the exemptions, and then we highlight where you go to find those exemptions.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Those are going to be in 1380.020F. Before we get there, though, the exemption process is in subparagraph D under 13.80.010. And you'll see that in the red line version, the process is entirely new. That's being added in. And that's something that could have been implemented by policy or by administrative rule. I find it's helpful to have it in the code. The public has easy access to it. There's an easy place to go to find out exactly what to do. So we suggested adding that in to clarify. In a nutshell, the procedure is that a property owner applies for the exemption. They select which one they think applies, and again, those are listed out in the new paragraph F in the next section. The town manager has authority to issue the exemption. It's based on documentation, and the type of documentation necessary to satisfy each claimed exception is also listed next to the exception itself. So there's a clear framework for exactly what they need to bring in to town hall. That exemption is subject to quarterly review and renewal. And the idea here is just because you've established that you qualify for an exception in May, you don't necessarily get an unlimited exemption. If circumstances change or if they don't remain exactly as you said they do, the town manager can revoke the exemption, basically. Once it's issued, the individual who gets the exemption doesn't have to pay for the service. That's step 3 under paragraph D. And 4 is the town manager's decision on the exemption is final. That's with respect to the town, of course. If somebody is aggrieved, they can go to court. That's the same of any ministerial permit issuance, and that would be subject potentially to a writ of mandate under Code of Civil Procedure 1085. The next portion of the amendment is to section 13.80.020, and this only addresses subparagraph F, which is amended in its entirety and replaced with the following. And these are the exemptions basically rephrased in a clearer format. So the first exemption is self-hauler. That's somebody who takes their own waste to the landfill. And they can document this, that they do this at least every 7 days, possibly with receipts from the landfill. That's the easiest way to do it. The second possible exemption is that the property owner arranged for shared solid waste disposal with the occupant of another structure. So this is somebody, you share an account basically with a neighbor. So what you just aren't, it's not that you're necessarily exempt from having the service, it's that you're sharing it with somebody else, and how you arrange for that payment is up to you. So your parcel may not be subject to the fee, but you probably are going to be paying it with your neighbor. And by neighbor, we have sort of a limited definition of who can share a service. So, for example, one service account shared by no more than 2 adjacent parcels owned by the same person. The second possibility is a service account shared by owners or occupants of no more than 2 separate structures with a common driveway. So your main house and your second unit. And the third is one service account shared by primary and secondary units on a single parcel. That allows for the fact that the second one is 2 units that might be separated by a parcel line. The third one is on the same parcel. So they're really the same idea.
So, Mike, a quick question about that specific, those definitions. We have several flag lots in town, shared driveway, multiple structures, different ownership.
Mm-hmm.
That does not apply here?
That actually might apply under B. That's 2B. So 2 separate parcels, 2 separate owners, separate structures, 1 common driveway.
But there's more than... So, okay, in that case, there would not be more than 1 service account, even though they're...
Yeah, they could share an account.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Only get so many trash cans in one driveway.
Yeah. Okay, so go ahead and continue.
Let's see. And then the last one is the... which was in the existing code, but we just clarified about water service, because of course your garbage service is tied to water service. If your water service is for irrigation purposes only and there's no actual living structure there, you don't need to have a garbage service. And that's the third subparagraph.
Can you give an example of that condition?
I suppose that would be a property owner that just has a vineyard and no habitable structure.
Yeah, we have a handful of undeveloped properties. Some of them may have a water account for garden, landscaping, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
And the remaining changes are basically to clarify references to this exemption process and to use consistently the term exemption to apply to the act taken by your town manager. Exception is the category that you're seeking an exemption for. So a lot of that was clarification of words and consistent use of terms so that they made sense across the board. And then lastly, the ordinance has some additional boilerplate that I recommend in general, but that doesn't have a substantive change to your code. Those are parts of the ordinance, but won't become amendments to your code, if that makes sense. They're uncodified portions.
So just, I'll ask for other questions in a second. Just to go back to the point, it's a point 4D, 13-80-010 on second page. Town manager decision on exemption shall be final. We're not required to have an appeals process.
No, this is to some degree a question of policy and what it is you want your structure to look like. You can, of course, have an appeal from the town manager to the council. I don't know how excited you are about hearing such appeals, but you could have it. You could also create a totally different structure where you had, for example, your public works director evaluating the initial permit and your appeal going to the town manager. This is really entirely a matter of efficiency, structure, procedure. You can set it up however you like.
And I'm not proposing that we add that in. I just wanted to make sure there was no legal requirement that we have that type of
No,
appeal.
In this instance, you can just have it's basically a ministerial permit without an appeal process.
Okay.
An appeal would essentially be to the court.
Got it. Councilmember Dornbecker?
Yes, Michael, I need some clarification because going back to section 13.80.020 under the one, shared service, you said that two neighbors could share it, but only if the one person owns both parcels?
If you have a shared driveway,
Yes.
you don't need to have
I
the
see
same
that.
ownership. But you could have two parcels owned by the same person without a shared driveway, and they could share an account. That's one possibility. But you could not have, for example, two separate owners
I see.
with separate driveways.
If you remember, there was some comments made, and some of it had to deal with, especially in some of the older parts where we had multiple properties on one parcel. And we're trying to honor that commitment that if it's the parcel, they can share. But I think a good illustration would be two standalone single-family homes next to each other. We're not allowing that kind of sharing. The flag lot situation, because of other factors, that was something that the council had a consideration for, where so we're trying to address those things that were presented, that the council expressed to staff that was important to try to honor. And I would tend to agree with Mike that what we've really done, and staff's also worked on a format of a form, actually, that people will fill out that is clarifying what these are and a documentation. So we think this is just a tighter version of what it was you intended and provides some clarity. And I have to also agree, I think it addresses a concern of what, it takes away some of the definition of mandatory, clarifies it, provides a better structure.
Okay. Any other questions of the report? No? So I see in the recommendation of the staff report, it says conduct a public hearing, but this is not listed as a public hearing, so public comment, I'm assuming, is what was meant. Okay, so I will do that now. Invite anybody in the audience if you'd like to speak on this item. Seeing no one come forward, I'll ask council if we're prepared to take action on the item. Vice Mayor?
I'll make a motion to introduce and waive the reading of ordinance number 15-435, amending the Yountville Municipal Code regarding collection, transportation, disposal of solid waste.
I'll second.
Councilmember Dornbecker seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No opposition. That's passed unanimously. And thank you very much, Mike, for
Yes, thank you.
clarifying this and helping us get to the core of our effort. It's much appreciated.
Very welcome.
Steve, thank you very much for your input tonight also.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Julie, for the last minute.
Yes, and Julie, very impressive.
It shows up on the website, it just doesn't show up on mine.
Very impressive you're able to magically make all these copies appear.
In the future, I can also provide that in a PDF form. It shouldn't be.
I already thought that through, we'll just have to do it that way next
We'll work it out.
It's great. Paperless works great when it works. Okay, now we are going to item 12C, considering the adoption of resolution for a budget adjustment, increasing general fund appropriations related to Swank Construction litigation.
Thank you, Mayor Council. This is basically a budget authorization. As the council and the community knows, we had set aside money in legal contingency funds. Our funding policy is the council has to appropriate funds that are in a reserve. So at this point, the action in the resolution before you tonight is to move the money from the contingencies and to appropriate them in the budget. And then that becomes the funding structure that will be used to pay for the action that you took earlier today.
And just so I know that sometimes people will go straight to an agenda item on our website if they've missed a meeting, and I want to make sure that people understand the action that was taken earlier. And so what I can do very quickly is reference unless, Mike, do you think you can summarize in very short order? I'd almost feel better if you did it. Just very quickly, what action it was that we took that's bringing us to this item.
Well, Mr. Mayor, in closed session, the council considered and approved an agreement tying up and settling the litigation with Swank Construction, and approved, as part of that agreement, the payment of a sum of money. And this item is intended to formally make available in the budget that amount of money to satisfy the payment to which the town would be obligated under the agreement.
I knew you would do it more succinctly and more accurately than I, so thank you very much for that. Any other staff report part of that? I know we have a member of the public that wants to comment, but before we do that, any questions about this from council to staff?
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. There is one comment I would make. This money has been set aside. It will have no effect on the ability of the current budget or anything. You all were very conservative and diligent, and the money's been set aside in a contingency.
The outcome was anticipated, and funds were set aside in case the anticipation came to fruition. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll invite Carla. Now would be the time for your public comment. You've been patiently waiting to this very moment.
But I was very interested in the garbage issue, so
I told everybody.
I too have an interest in the garbage. What I would like to request or ask, Mr. Tagliaboschi was talking earlier about, I was confused, you said dashboard, and then is that the same thing as having something at your fingertips at a moment's notice?
Carla, can you just make sure you speak to the microphone and actually address the council? He can hear you while you're addressing us.
I wasn't sure what he meant by a dashboard. You were saying dashboard. He was saying something about a moment's notice. Were you talking about the same thing?
Okay, we'll handle all your questions if you want to ask them, and then we'll respond to them.
I'm asking you.
Is that the only question you
No,
have?
because then I want to ask you for something.
Okay, so the dashboard that was being discussed earlier was an internal document that our Public Works team is using to help monitor and understand the process of our capital improvement projects. Is that a fair?
That's accurate. Yeah, it's helping us track the budget and the documents that go along with that project. That's accurate.
Well, I thought it was one little piece of paper, a little graph or something, and that's what I was going to ask you. I need something that is very clear, something that you can look at quickly and get a grasp of the subject, and I'd like to see something put out about this litigation that we've been talking about, this $984,000.
We actually have that document for you. I didn't go down that chart in my press release that I read as a statement. It's already been made available by staff, and so
Does it show what exactly was spent in legal fees?
Yes.
What exactly you asked for?
There are about 20 or so items that are broken down, so you get a very detailed.
Is this true then that you went through some arbitration where we lost $984,000? That's how I was interpreting it. Is that what happened?
Not exactly. Yes, we went through an arbitration, but we did not lose $984,000 specifically, and that's where it gets into a little more explanation about the dollar amounts that are involved. But so if you have any other questions.
Yeah, that's my request, is that I'd like to see something really clear for the public, because people ask me this all the time.
It is already, it's already been drafted, and it is going to be made
Very
available.
clear.
We had to go through the process we've gone through tonight to get to that point of actually
Okay, so
releasing that
how
document.
much, I guess we lost money, is that the idea?
Well, and
Is
I'll
that
let...
the bottom line?
If, Steve, do you want to handle just some of the breakdown? I don't want you to go through the entire
Loss
thing.
is always a challenging word. The town received 1.7 million in claim for construction defects, and we have just paid out 984 on the breach of contract claim. The contract retention component was always the contractors upon release. So if you look at it in those two numbers, there's still money ahead, and we're using that money to repair.
And are the legal fees in here?
No, legal fees are completely separate, and I'll be providing that.
Is that going to be in that little chart then? The legal fees will be there?
The legal fees, legal fees are approximately 3.5 million is the total expense on.
But that's not on this item that we're talking about tonight. You need to understand that these are two separate legal actions. There was a legal action that was taken where the town sued Swank Construction and its subcontractors and the design team that designed the community center project, and we basically won in court for $1.7 million. And we're using approximately $800,000 of that to repair the defects that are currently underway, to repair the defects at the community center. This was an action taken by Swank Construction and one of their subcontractors to technically not sue, because this was not in a court of law, but this was, they claim that we breached the contract terms, and they requested through a binding arbitration process to recover damages, penalties, delays, and legal fees. And the arbitrator ruled what we talked about earlier this evening that I read in the statement, and that's where the separate item was that basically the town has to pay according to that arbitration ruling. So they're related to the community center, but they're two separate legal actions. And so the legal fees that you're referencing, the $3.5 million, covers both of those legal actions. So not just one or the other. It was a cumulative total.
Okay, so, yeah, so there's two things. Well, I would hope
about
then I
6
wouldn't
years.
have to come back and again ask next time when it's not on the agenda, if you could please put out a document that wraps up this entire litigation that you spent on the town, the community hall, whether it was one action or the other action, to see how much did we spend and how much did we lose.
And that's all available. And it's
Okay.
already, the new information has been put together and will be released now that it's actually final.
Good. And this is it then?
It's it.
Okay, it's over.
That,
Good.
yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
That's
thank
what
you.
we say, too.
Any other, Carrie, did you, okay. So seeing no other public comment, is there any discussion by the council, or is there an action to be had?
I think the only discussion is that it's a long time coming to wrap this up and be done with an unfortunate outcome. I'd like to propose we adopt resolution number 153258, approving budget adjustment number 2014-15-02, increasing general fund appropriations $984,000 for CL-SCIL Swank Construction, Inc. litigation.
Second.
Moved by Hall, seconded by Mueller. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. No opposition to that. So, thank you. And I agree with the Vice Mayor's statement. We all agree that the best part of this is it's now concluded.
Over.
Definitively concluded, so thank you. Moving on. Let's see, what are we up to? Staff informational reports. Do we have any?
We actually do. We would like to provide a little update on some of the efforts on water conservation, and we have both a great public education outreach and I always like to show off what our GIS efforts are doing, and we have a double win today, again on our theme of improved staff efficiency and effectiveness.
It'll be so efficient, it'll be quick. So, we know during its April 21st meeting, the Yountville Town Council approved Resolution 153255, which established water emergency water conservation regulations. Now, the purpose of this report that we're giving now is to provide an update on staff's efforts to really put the action taken into practice. And so first, Just recap real quick what the resolution did. It prohibited the following activities: using potable water to wash down the sidewalks and driveways, watering outdoor landscapes in a manner that causes excess runoff, washing motor vehicles without a shutoff nozzle, irrigation between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., as well as watering of park medians without a drip irrigation system. It also initiates these following activities: landscape irrigation restricted to twice a week, depending on even or odd addresses, and new development projects shall be required to install drip irrigation systems and drought-tolerant landscape. There's a number of other ones that were included. One of them was that new developments for swimming pools that include swimming pools in the plans. We're saying maybe hold off on the swimming pool until we're not in a drought. And in fact, we actually have received 2 applications since this action was taken where that has been included as a condition of approval, saying, no, don't fill your swimming pool until the drought's over. Now, staff has taken a number of efforts to improve its education. Part of this includes those good-looking message trailers that you can see across town. They'll move around neighborhoods regularly. They won't be in front of your house all summer. They'll be moving around so everyone in the town can see what the watering limits are and what days your address is supposed to be irrigating. We've also included information in our newsletter. We are also putting out information constantly via social media on our Facebook, Twitter, Nextdoor. Name the social media platform. We're saying something about the drought on it. We also have a certain page on our website that helps explain what the regulations are. Now, the fun part is enforcement. We've provided a number of bilingual door hangers. Could you based on our last meeting with the town council, staff received feedback on how to display this information accurately. So it's dual-sided, one side in Spanish, the other in English, to notify residents of violations and also to educate those that have committed the violations on how to bring their property into compliance. The system works as follows. The first notice, they'll get a door hanger on their house. Second notice, they'll get a hanger with bags that contain helpful information on how to improve water usage, such as a WaterWise education wheel. Will also include some products that are made for conservation, such as shower timers, those toilet tank banks, toilet dye tabs, fill cycle diverters for your toilet tank, and other kind of materials that, with also education on how to use the things, that really have shown to reduce water wasting inside the home. Then on the third notice, they are officially on notice and they may be susceptible to fees. And so by doing this, we're hoping that it will reduce water usage across the town. Now, we're using our new GIS software to track those that have committed violations. We have this map available to staff that helps us get a good snapshot of who has done what. What staff can easily do, this is just a picture, but if you follow along on my mouse, you can all mime what I would do. I'll say there's a home here that would have committed a violation, whether it's overwatering or maybe their sprinklers are causing runoff so it goes into the street. I would just click on first notice, bring it in here, and I advance the slide. I'd bring it in here, and this new box would open up where I'd be able to include the information saying it's a first notice. This is who reported it. This is why it was reported. I can include pictures in there, so it really shows evidence of everything. So we can keep a good history of our violations, and not so much to keep track of who did what wrong at what time, but we can track what educational materials we have provided with everyone and what resources we have given certain individuals so they can improve their water usage habits.
Quick question about that, and I'll ask Councilmember Muller after. I've had more than once somebody report a violation but not want to be identified because
it's anonymous.
Their neighbors. You say who, so it just comes up as anonymous if they don't.
When I said who reported it, I meant who was the staff member that handled the case.
Okay.
So I misspoke.
Got it. And that was your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go
I
ahead.
think it should be anonymous, otherwise, everyone calls me or the rest of the council and expects us to do it, so.
But that's fine, just for clarification. Okay, thank you.
Well, and that really is, with all of our educational efforts and using these resources in order to track our efforts, we're hoping that we can continue to be an example to the region on a neighborhood and a community that values its water usage. So,
Thank you. I want to, just on behalf of the whole council, thank all of you for being so responsive to, the bilingual door hanger, adding some of the information here. I know Councilmember Dornbecker talked about the Cash for Grass and making sure that that information is being provided. So you've been very responsive to what we are hearing and what our concerns are. So thank you to both of you and the rest of the team. I also have noticed, I'm sure everyone else has, there are people that are not self-reporting, there are people reporting. I'm surprised at how engaged the public has really become very quickly. I mean, we're getting emails and calls, almost daily. People are noticing, and they're calling people out on it, and so this is really resonating with the community. So that's encouraging in and of itself. So thank you. Any other thoughts,
Well,
Councilmember
just
Dornbecker?
that, on that note, I did think that you were going to put a prompt on the door hanger saying, please, feel free to inquire about our Cash for Grass program, but that's not on here.
we have information like that in those bags that we'd provide with
I
the
see.
violators as well. In order to get the good dual-sided English and Spanish, it came down to what do we have room for without making it too cramped of a document.
And then I noticed on the photo that you had, and I didn't really notice it on that electronic sign on Oak Circle, but I know that's there because I've seen it. But on the photo that you had, it said lawn watering limits. And it's not just lawn watering, is it? It's landscape watering.
It's all landscape irrigation.
Okay.
That's what the ordinance.
All the other, but they all,
Resolution.
I agree. I've seen the same message. Maybe it should say yard instead of lawn, because, people that don't have lawn, it doesn't mean that they have full discretion over how much water they use.
yeah, that's my point, is that those signs should say, irrigation of your yard.
Yard.
Yeah, and we
Started
have
with irrigation, it didn't fit, and we thought, the yard sounds like
Yard
something
is
we
no
can do,
longer
but.
than lawn,
yeah.
so that's
Well,
why-
yard isn't, irrigation was, so yard we can do.
So, and we always welcome feedback like that so we can consistently improve our outreach efforts.
I just wanted to point out that my husband had already set up our watering on Mondays and Thursdays.
Well, that was another example of being responsive to, at least two of us were asking about the separation of water days, and again, that makes sense. So thank you. Any other thoughts about this?
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dana.
Thank you very much. Any other staff reports?
Now, the only thing I'd say is these are the types of things, including this PowerPoint, we can put on our website and again get multiple use out of the effort that our staff is doing. So the same presentation will get distributed on other media to help tell the story.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to council meeting reports. First one, I am going to ask Councilmember Dornbecker to report on Napa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District.
Yes, that meeting was today, and there was really only one item on the agenda that we took action on, and that was that we approved the proposed fiscal year 2015-2016 assessments based on the Joint Zone Project 96-1, which is there are certain property owners who belong to that area that they need to assess for water conservation. And so they were waiting to see if they had anyone who objected. Nobody did, so we passed. And then I have another report on the Watershed Information Center and Conservancy. We had an ad hoc committee meeting in that we're developing a work program. And the work program, the main thing that we want to come out of it is communication with the community. So you can expect there'll be a presentation by one of the WIC board members here coming up sometime soon. And also I wanted to reiterate that the Watershed Information and Conservation Conservancy Water Symposium is actually Friday, May 15th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the City Winery. And I want to encourage people to attend. There is a $35 charge, and I need to ask council. I have asked members of our ad hoc the Go Green team to attend that for informational purposes and get some grounding in, because they are going to be talking about water issues and things. And several of them have expressed agreement to do that. And one of them asked if the town would be willing to subsidize their fee for attending that. And I don't know whether that's something I need the council to approve, or if Steve could approve that, or would that be something we would do? I don't know.
I know we do have a budget item for council expenses.
Actually, the
commissions.
Boards and commissions that are doing official representation, and we've had several. For example, we've sent ZDRB members to the Planning Commission. I would say that a request can come through, and staff will review and determine if it's appropriate in the scope and evaluate that. But we do have
we have to know before they go, not
correct.
If they're concerned about reimbursement, and also it may or may not be something that the entire Go Green team needs to go to, or if somebody can report to the rest of.
They're just a couple going.
But if somebody could go and represent and then report back to the rest of the group, that might be more appropriate.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So you already
that's
got my item B. We're going to then go to the Vice Mayor and the Napa County Youth and Gang Violence Task Force.
Thank you. And so we meet quarterly, but we met last Wednesday in the fair city of St. Helena at the fire department. Second time we've had this meeting at St. Helena. It was difficult because there is not a significant amount of gang issues in Napa County, which is by all interests a very positive thing. They're not very widely attended. That said, we did have presentations from two groups that actually do mentoring for Latin American males and females in the middle school to high school area up valley. So it was very informative, and there's a lot of good work that goes on. We did learn the commission has a report that's due to the Board of Supervisors, and that will be occurring after the next meeting. So I'll give a report on the final report, but I'll give a report to this group on the final report that's submitted to the board. But the only other piece of business that came out of this is that presently the Board of Supervisors representative is Brad Wagenknecht, and he has been asked by a prior member of the commission from Napa City, now Board of Supervisor or Napa County Board of Supervisor Alfredo Pedroza, if they can swap seats. And so Alfredo is going to be joining this group and actually be coming in as the chair for the next year for this commission. So that was the update for that meeting. Fortunately, no gang violence to have really reported on.
Very good. I will just report a little bit of a recap and also a preview the Napa County Agricultural Protection Advisory Committee, on which I sit and am vice chair. We'll be meeting again this coming Monday. And just as a recap, at our last meeting, we started to tackle a little bit of the substantive issues of winery development and land use as it relates most specifically to wineries, but also overall with the agricultural lands. And there is discussion right now happening, and it will continue on Monday, regarding possible minimum parcel sizes. Right now, the minimum parcel size for a winery is 10 acres. There's discussion about increasing that, because as of right now, in theory, there are over 4,000 parcels that could qualify for a winery, and I think everybody agrees that is probably too high a number. No net loss of vineyard is another category under discussion, and the third category is a percentage of estate grapes requirement, so that you can't have a parcel that has a winery that doesn't have any grapes or other agricultural component to it. So those are the three topics for now. I welcome any member of the public as well as any member of the council. If you have any thoughts or questions that I can offer the committee on your behalf, feel free to email me. So that's an ongoing effort every 2 weeks until September, when we are going to present our recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. I also attended the Association of Bay Area Governments down in Oakland, and there was an extensive, little over a half-day kind of symposium on water management and the future of water use and water availability in the Bay Area. At the end of the evening, unfortunately, there were not enough members present for a quorum so that we could vote on the next year's budget or any other action. So hopefully the Vice Mayor is going to be available for the conference call. They're now trying to hold a quorum vote for those items. Those are my meeting reports. Any other meeting reports? Seeing none. We'll move right ahead to adjournment to our next meeting, which is going to be a budget workshop. Is this technically really supposed to be number one? No, we've done some before.
It's number
36. 36.
All right.
Number two.
Maybe it's better we don't number them so I can just keep guessing.
We did consolidate this year.
Thank you.
Yes.
Budget
I
workshop.
thought you'd appreciate that.
Yes, of course. I'll continue to complain about it, but that's all right. Budget workshop on Tuesday, May 12th at 1:30 in these chambers. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn to
So
that
moved.
meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all very much.